Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel.
I had to put on my reaching hat. Hear me out.
He said it himself that one of us was going to have to die, and he said it, not me. And she said also that she felt empty and dead inside, and that she was so miserable that she couldn't go on another day.
A lot of this was my fault because I was old and fat and ugly and boring and stupid, and that, you know, he just wasn't having any fun in life anymore. If you're old, fat, ugly, boring, and stupid, you try to be younger, and you go and try to get wrinkles taken off your face that weren't even there. You try and get your teeth fixed, because I have one tooth that's a little tiny millimeter of something crooked, and I tried to be perfect. Absolutely flawlessly perfect for Dan Broderick.
She's real close to money. She worshipped money. It was her main goal in her life. She loved it. She's a very materialistic person. She always was.
Hi, thank you for clicking. Sorry if my voice is a little bit low, but there's people here and I'm embarrassed. I make true crime and conspiracy videos, which I usually wear this hat. Today is actually a true crime video, but you know, we just need to keep with the theme. Plus this hides my roots. Yeah, if any time during this video you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps out. Let's get into today's case. Today we're going to be talking about Betty Broderick. Betty. She had an anger problem. So when her husband betrayed her, well, she kind of lost it. Let's start at the beginning. Betty actually wrote a book and I bought it. I keep buying these crazy people's books. She wrote a book called Telling on Myself. Yes, literally telling on myself. She wrote this book when she was in jail, but we'll get to that. Betty was born Elizabeth Ann Bescaglia on November 7th, 1947. She grew up in a wealthy family. They lived in the suburbs of New York, and she was the third of 5 children. Her family was a very strict Roman Catholic family. She went to Catholic school, and according to her, she was raised to be a good wife and have children and clean and cook and do all that. Very, very traditional upbringing. Then Betty met Dan in 1965. Dan would become her husband and also her undoing. So she met him right before her 18th birthday at a college party. She says that she barely gave him a second look. In the book, she insults him in so many ways. She says that he was not her type. He was too short for her because she was tall and she was used to dating the athletes, but that he also came from a Catholic family, a strict family, and that they had the same ideals, family values. So they ended up getting married in April of 1969 at this elaborate wedding at the Immaculate Conception Church, which was this famous Catholic church that was very close to where Betty was raised. So they had their wedding and they went on their honeymoon, and according to Betty, this is where she got her first red flag. She says that on the honeymoon, he changed. He felt like, you know, he sealed the deal, they're married, and he wanted her to do all the duties of the house, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, all that kind of stuff. And they had rented this home on their honeymoon that came with a maid, and he sent them all packing and let her know that from now on, these things are your responsibilities. She says that this was a shock to her because she was raised with a nanny and a maid, housekeepers, and so she never was accustomed to doing that and was shocked that she would have to do that now. According to Betty, it was at this moment where her life turned from, quote, bliss to disaster. And she said that in that moment she threatened to leave Dan, but she says she found out that she was pregnant as soon as they got back from the honeymoon, and that she felt trapped, and so therefore she decided to stick with the marriage. She was pregnant with her eldest daughter, Kim. Kim would later testify against her mother in court, but we'll get into that later. It was January 1970 when Kim Broderick was born. She was born a month early, and they were so unprepared before her birth, that she actually spent the early months of her life sleeping in the dresser drawer. Dan initially was going to medical school and he was going to be a doctor. But then he decided that he wanted to actually get a law degree and combine the two and become a medical malpractice lawyer. Betty agreed. She thought that was a good idea. And so she actually then became the breadwinner at that time while she was pregnant, while he completed his studies. This fact is something she grew to resent for a long time. So she found herself pregnant again, and she gave birth to her second daughter, Lee, in 1973. It was around this time that Dan had graduated and he had gotten a job at a law firm in San Diego, and the whole family moved to a suburb called La Jolla in San Diego so that he could start working at this very prestigious law firm. Once they moved to La Jolla, the Brodericks became a fixture in the local social scene. Everybody knew the Brodericks. Dan became a local celebrity. He had this prestigious medical degree from Cornell combined with a Harvard law degree. Soon, Dan became $1 million a year attorney. During this time, they also had 2 more kids, 2 sons, Rhett and Dan Jr. So at this point, one would think that Betty would be happy because that lavish lifestyle that she was used to, not only did she have it again, she actually had more than that. They were now wealthier than her parents were when she was growing up. But according to her eldest daughter, Kim, she wasn't happy. Quote, "Mom was always kind of weird. Mom would get mad at Dad all the time. Once Mom picked up the stereo and threw it at him, and she locked him out constantly. He'd come around to my window and whisper, 'Kim, let me in.'" Kim also says that her mother was abusive towards her and her sister. She said that her mother would constantly throw things at them, including frozen food, regularly. She also says that her sister Lee would always say, quote, "Your spankings don't hurt me." So Mom said, "Okay, next time you're bad, I'll hit you with a fly swatter." And Lee was out in the yard and Mom went after her with the swatter, and the little screen came off, so it was just the wire, and she kept hitting her. Lee had big welts all over her legs. I'd grab Danny and hide in the closet. Then Dan, not Junior, but Betty's husband Dan, his brother Larry Broderick, he spoke to interviewers and he said that Betty was constantly threatening to leave him, constantly verbally abusing him, and it got to the point where Dan just kind of like retreated into his shell and would just focus on work and go into his room when he was home, and then he kind of threw himself into work. Kim agreed with her Uncle Larry, and she was also quoted as saying she was always getting dressed up and at the last minute saying, "I'm not going," and she was always telling me they were getting a divorce. She'd say, "Who are you going to live with?" I was dying for Dad to divorce her. I'd say to Dad, "Just take me the day you leave." The situation was already bad in the marriage, and then it got worse. Why? Because Dan decided to hire a young woman by the name of Linda Colkenna. Now, Linda was 21 when he hired her. Linda hadn't been to college and she didn't even know how to type, but Dan still hired her as his legal assistant, which of course made Betty suspicious. Why would he hire this young woman with no experience to be his assistant? Unless there was something else going on. A month after Dan hired Linda, Betty and Dan went on vacation. And it was during this vacation where Betty says she noticed he was being very distant. She confronted him and asked him if he was having an affair with Linda. He denied the affair, but he also told her in that moment that he didn't love her anymore. In fact, he said he hated her. But instead of just leaving him in that moment, she felt like she wanted to win him back. So her suspicions would be confirmed on Dan's 39th birthday. She was in for a rude awakening. She decided to go to his office with gifts and balloons and stuff to surprise him for his birthday. But when she arrived at the office, she found the remnants of a party, a bottle of champagne that was empty with 2 glasses, cake, balloons. But Dan wasn't there, and neither was Linda. The receptionist was there. The receptionist said that Dan and Linda had been gone from the office for most of the day. So Betty lost it. She decided to go home, in front of her kids, by the way, get all his clothes, took it and set it on fire in the yard, and then, because she's psycho, She cooked him his favorite meal. Imagine that inner conflict. Can you imagine that feeling of hating and loving someone so much that you are burning their clothes on their birthday while simultaneously cooking them their favorite roast? She says that when Dan came home, she gave him his checkbook and she told him, leave, you're out of here. But Dan refused. Dan was very, very against divorce. This is a Catholic thing, you know. Catholics, they usually frown upon divorce. It's not really allowed in the church. So it was in his DNA to stick it out no matter what. Same thing with Betty. Then came September 1984. It was in this month that Dan discovered a crack in the foundation of their home. And it required major, major repairs where they had to move out and rent a home while this house was getting fixed. Betty thinks that this was all an elaborate plan to get her out of the house, because a few months after they got the rental home, Dan left the rental home and moved into the home with the crack in it before it was repaired. When Dan moved back into the house, you will not believe what Betty did. She started dropping off the children at the house one by one. First, she started with her eldest daughter, Kim, who remembers this as a traumatic experience. Kim was 15 when this happened, and she says, quote, "It was on Easter. I asked her to drive my friend home and she lost it. She said, pack your bags." Kim says no one was home, so she had to wait hours at the doorstep for her dad to come home. Then, a few days later, Betty did the same thing with Danny. She left him at the doorstep. A month and a half later, she dropped Lee and Rhett, the last of the 4 kids that she had, at the doorstep, and this one was really, really bad. According to Kim, quote, "They were hysterical, holding on to her, crying and screaming, crying hard. 'Don't leave us here.' It was awful. She said, 'I'm leaving. Your dad's not gonna get away with this.'" A few months after she dropped the kids off, she went back to the house and she trashed the house. She broke mirrors. She spray painted on the walls. She trashed Dan's bedroom. And she graffitied the fireplace, the curtains, the wall, everything. A few months after that, Dan confessed to his affair with Linda, and he filed for divorce after 16 years of marriage. And the divorce would be known as the most vicious divorce in San Diego's history. It was a 5-year divorce, and it was Broderick versus Broderick. You can even look it up. There's all these news articles about it. It was such a big deal at the time. Now, Dan, being a lawyer, right, he knew all the moves to make. He had a lot of connections with the judges, with the lawyers, and Betty claims that she was never able to get a fair shake. She claimed that no lawyer wanted to work with her because they knew that she was his ex-wife, and that the judges were biased, and that she couldn't get a fair trial in San Diego. A month after this whole thing happened, Dan says that Betty returned to the house again, twice. The first time she returned to the house, she took a cream pie and she smeared it all over. Then 4 days later, she came back and she threw bottles of wine through the windows of the house. So Dan got a temporary restraining order, which she violated immediately. She came in with an umbrella and she smashed the windows and broke a toaster. So then in November, Dan filed criminal contempt charges against Betty. And things were about to get worse. Why? Because in November of 1986, Dan sold the house. According to Betty, he sold it from under her. So what did Betty do when she found out he sold the house? She took her car and she ran into the front door of the house while the children were still in the home. Listen to her daughter testify about it.
But the accounts of rage and fury didn't stop there. Kim said her mother once smeared cake on her father's bed and scrawled obscenities with lipstick on the mirror in his house. And another time when Betty drove into the front of his Marston Hills home.
The car came through the house. Not through the house, it hit the door, and it sounded like a chainsaw, and I ran out the back door.
In court documents, Dan stated that when he opened the door and saw that Betty had crashed into it, he tried to pull her out, and that's when he saw that she had a large butcher knife under the seat of the car. He claims that once he saw that, he restrained her and he had her checked into a mental health facility for 3 days. By this time, Dan had sole custody of the children, and him and Linda were openly dating. Which, as you can imagine, Betty, she didn't take that so well. So what did she do? She started calling and leaving profane, obscene messages on the answering machine. So many messages. Some of these messages would then be played in court.
I have very important things to ask you. You're making me mad. I'll kill you.
That was tame compared to other messages played during cross-examination. Prosecutor Carrie Wells asked Broderick if she put her 7-year-old son, Rhett, up to leaving this message for his father.
Do you pay Linda to sleep with you? Goodbye.
I didn't have Rhett do that, but I heard Rhett do that, and I've heard for years that Rhett did that.
You were right there when Rhett made that call, weren't you?
No.
You dared him to make the call.
No.
So as a punishment to these calls, Dan, who was paying her $16,000 a month in alimony, was docking her, for example, $100 for every obscene word she used, $250 for each time she set foot on his property, $500 for every entry into his house, $1,000 for every time she took one of the children without his permission. Betty claims that there was 1 month where he had given her so many fines, right, that her monthly alimony payment was negative $1,300. On the flip side, Betty claims that it was actually Dan and Linda who were tormenting her. She claims that Dan was telling her that she's ugly and fat and old and stupid, and that they both mocked her. She says that she got a letter in the mail, which she believes was from Linda, that had a picture of Linda and Dan happily together, and it said, "Eat your heart out, bitch." She soon after that got advertisements from Linda for wrinkle cream and a weight loss product in the mail, and she feels like they were taunting her, they were mocking her. The divorce was finalized in 1989. That same year, a few months later, Dan married Linda. Linda was so worried for Dan's safety that she actually asked him to wear a bulletproof vest at his wedding. So they had their wedding, nobody died, and then the fateful day. It was 2 days before Betty's 42nd birthday. Let me set the scene. It's the wee hours Sunday morning, pitch black, and Betty has been tossing and turning all night. She can't sleep. Why, she says? Because 2 days ago she got some court documents which she claims was a threat from Dan, who was going to file criminal contempt charges against her. So what did she decide to do? She took her .38 revolver, put it in her purse, got in her car in the dark of night, and drove to Dan and Linda's home. She shows up at the house. She lets herself in with Kim's key. She tiptoes into the master bedroom. She says that she was standing there. They were both in their bed, sleeping, Dan and Linda. Her eyes hadn't even adjusted to the darkness, and she let off 5 shots. According to her, quote, real fast, no hesitation at all. 1 bullet hit the bedside table. Another one hit the wall. 3 bullets hit Dan and Linda. 1 pierced Linda's neck and lodged in her brain. Another one hit her in the chest. A 3rd one hit Dan in his back, fracturing a rib and tearing through his right lung. According to Betty, when Dan got shot, he fell over on the floor near the telephone and he said, quote, okay, you got me. I'm dead. She says there was no pain and there was no blood, which, okay, sure. Quote, he was on the floor and the phone was right next to him. I thought, oh my God, he's going to be on that phone before I'm down the stairs. So she ripped the phone out of the wall and she ran. Betty's daughter, Lee, the second one, she testified that her mother had called her immediately after the shooting, and this is what she said.
Before
19-year-old Lee Broderick received a call from her mother the morning of November 5th, the day Daniel Broderick and his new wife Linda were shot to death.
my mom called and said that she was in trouble, that she needed my help. And I asked why, and she said that she had shot my father.
When she indicated that she shot your father, can you tell us exactly what words she used?
She said, I shot your dad, I shot the son of a bitch.
Betty went to her daughter Lee's house. She had the gun on her. She was throwing up. She was saying how she wanted to kill herself. She called another friend, and then later that day she ended up turning herself into police, and she got arrested. The day after, the medical examiner came out and said that although Linda died instantly, Dan died a slow and painful death. They explained that as his lungs filled with blood, he would have been desperately gasping for air before he actually died, for at least several minutes. Betty is quoted as saying, "It always makes me mad when people call them the victims. Me and my kids were the victims. There are 2 dead people, but there were 5 victims." Betty took the stand in her own defense. She claimed a battered woman defense, a psychological, emotional attack on her and her children. She also claimed that Dan was abusive towards the children, which the children actually testified against her. So I don't know if I believe that. This is Betty testifying.
Betty Broderick remembers the day, November 5th of last year, the day she said she finally had it.
And I was just standing in that kitchen saying, you know, Jesus Christ, I'm turning 42 years old, and I've been put through this bullshit since I was 35. 7 years of my life wasted. I was just a mess. Everything just came down on me, and I just couldn't stand it another minute. And that's what I wrote on the stuff, is I just can't stand this. I'm telling people I'm a child molester and I'm crazy and I'm an unfit mother.
So I threw all his clothes in the backyard and I put gasoline on him and I lit them. And I waited for him to come home for the home-cooked roast beef dinner he wanted for his birthday.
He sold their only joint property from beneath her, their home. When he wouldn't discuss the matter, she drove her car into his house.
I had no one to talk to. I just wanted to talk to Dan, and I bammed my car into his door.
When Broderick showed the prosecutor the scars from what Broderick said was a suicide attempt over Dan, the prosecutor said she couldn't see the scars. The judge suggested, and Broderick agreed, to show the jury.
I used a man's razor and a right-handed, and I cut myself 3 times on these blue lines.
And when it came to Broderick's claims that she couldn't take her children because she didn't get enough money from her ex, Wells produced clothing bills.
On December 8th, 1987, did you write a $1,000 check to Nordstrom's?
If that's what it says, yes.
Is that your check now?
Yes.
On December 15th, 1987, did you write a $1,000 check to Neiman Marcus?
Yes.
The total for clothing that year, $37,000.
Her kids testified against her.
Unable to hold back tears, Kim told the court how her mother vented her wrath on others. She told of the day Betty was supposed to visit Kim's apartment.
So I cleaned it up and got all dressed up, and then I called her about an hour and a half later and said, "Mom, where are you?" And she said, "Oh, well, I was driving down the street right by SeaWorld, and all of a sudden I just remembered I hate your guts. You just make me sick, and why would I want to come over and visit you?" And on and on and on. So that hung up. And then I called her back a few minutes later and said, "Well, why? What did I do?" She said, "You're just a traitor. You make me sick. The sight of you makes me want to throw up, and I wish I were never born."
While Kim was testifying, her mother, Betty, was increasingly agitated, gesturing and talking animatedly to her attorney and scribbling hurried notes. At one point, when the judge was conferring with the attorneys, Betty tried to get her daughter's Kim attention. Quote, "Hey Kim," she whispered. Kim is said to have been staring straight ahead. Sorry, my dog's barking. And then there was a bombshell. And when I heard this, I almost choked. She had a man on the side. Now, I'm not sure if she was with him like when she was married, but during the time that Dan was with Linda and Betty was obsessing over them, she had a boyfriend. His name was Brad. Listen to this. Bradley T. Wright was a 36-year-old, tall, sandy-haired businessman and avid sailor who calls himself Betty's boyfriend. Brad and Betty ate dinner together and slept together frequently for years. In fact, the morning of the murder, she was in the bed with Brad. She left him and she did what she did. So, of course, Betty was confronted with this in an interview, because Betty did a lot of interviews. Betty denied that they were sleeping together, like sexually. And when she was asked why he was there then, why was he sleeping over at your house if you guys weren't sleeping together, she said, quote, "It was like having a dog, but he was house trained." Damn, Betty. So that trial ended in a hung jury, so it was declared a mistrial. And then she had a second trial. In that trial, she was found guilty. She was convicted on 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of using a firearm in the commission of a felony, and she was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. She had several parole hearings in 2010 and 11 and 2017, and she got denied in every single one. As of now, she won't be eligible for parole till January 2032, at which point she would be 84 years old. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys more than you know. Seriously, I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you so much for the people who leave comments and like my videos. You're the best. And thank you. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.